So tonight, does the sound okay? Okay. Going to try to finish, promise, this first section of verses from chapter 10. I'm looking at the 7th in line, page, maybe 6 to 7 page. And so the 7th is the Dharma nature, the 8th, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and then 9th is thus in accord, and then the final verse. So try to get through this, because tonight's our last semester lecture, no more until the fall. So maybe try a little bit here with the Chinese. Bear with my pronunciation, but if you speak really loudly, you won't hear my butchered Chinese. I'll be really good. Fa xing ban wu sheng, shi xian er you sheng, shi zhong wu neng xian, yi wu suo xian wu. Let's take the next one too. We're on a roll. Yan er bi shi shen, yin yi zhu qing gan, yi che kong wu xing, wang xin fan bie you. Okay. And tonight I'm going to kind of go through some of my understanding of this. This is always not easy, but also to use some of Master Hua's commentary to kind of shed some light differently than mine. Since Dharma nature basically, or fundamentally, or all along, I think is better, all along, unproduced, which means all along it's ever present, ever available. It doesn't come into being, it doesn't pass away. So I like all along rather than basically. And I don't like fundamentally. Sorry, I'm giving you all my translation things tonight. Still it manifests coming into being, yet there's nothing making it manifest, nor anything that is manifested. So Master Hua's commentary at this point says something that coming into being is not an ultimate state of existence, an unchanging, permanent being, nor is it something permanent that will never decay. On the other hand, it's not going into nothingness either. So it's in some sort of process of coming and going without these distinctions or borders. And this is where the Avatamsaka starts with the preface, going and returning with no borders. So it's describing a state of constant change, but within systems and patterns, if you will, governed by karma. But it's not like there's an absolute existence or non-existence. And his commentary says, there's no one authority to make anything appear, nor is there anything that is manifested. This goes back to the idea that this change that's manifesting, going in and out, is not governed by an external agent. It's not governed by a God or a supreme being, but rather it's governed by our thoughts and actions, intentional actions by body, speech, and mind. Nor is there anything that's manifested, meaning anything permanent, unfixed, unchanging, that is manifested. Nor are there any objects that are made to appear. In fact, I'm reading the commentary, basically it is all just empty, sunyata, unreal state, unreal in the sense that it's impermanent, not that it doesn't actually manifest. But again, the tension in this language here is to say, yes, it's there, but it's not there in any permanent, unfixed way. The change is the constant here. But, he says, we people mistake this illusory state for reality. We do not know that it is something ephemeral that cannot be relied on. And so we become attached to this illusory existence and forget about the basic true emptiness. We mistake this illusory existence as being truly substantial, as being something we can get hold of. Mine, me, make it. But if you can see through this illusory existence and break through your attachment to it, you will unite with the wonderful principle of fundamental true emptiness. And then he uses the expression here many times, this true emptiness, this true letting go is actually wondrous existence. And the wondrous existence is in this state of not clinging or attaching. The next passage goes on. The eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the thinking mind. I'm reading the translation. This is referring to probably the sixth consciousness. The sensory organs all are empty, without a nature. But the false mind discerns them as existent. So again, it's talking about, in the Buddhist sense, our experience of reality is a combination of 6, 6, and 6. It's called the 18. 18 realms of existence, 18 realms of, and it consists of the 6 sense faculties and the sense objects, and then the consciousnesses that can join and move between them. So 6 sense faculties are, give me a time to sip my tea, somebody. 6 sense faculties are? Okay, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body, and then mind, meaning 6 consciousness. You didn't give me time, you guys are fast. Excuse me. And the 6 objects, or the 6 objects of those faculties: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, body. So sight, sound, smells, taste, tangibles, the kinesthetic, and then this is called dharmas. But it means those things that are manufactured by the 6 discriminating consciousness. And again, that's going back to the previous section, which we take to be real, but in fact are not. And then there's a consciousness said to arise between those. Now, when that consciousness moves to attach and grasp and identify and say, this is mine, this is real, I have it, and so on and so forth, wisdom turns into then consciousness. If consciousness perceives but does not attach, merely observes the rise and fall of these phenomena, then consciousness turns back into wisdom. So this is a very dynamic back and forth. Master Wa's commentary, he says, in this section of verse, the eyes refer to consciousness. So here he's rendering these as the various consciousnesses. The eyes refer to eye consciousness and so forth, ear consciousness, nose to olfactory consciousness, tongue to taste, and probably smell, if you use tongue, olfactory. So tongue and taste are really very, very closely aligned. Body is body consciousness, and thinking, mind to the mind consciousness, or the 6 consciousness. Together they comprise the sense organs and their associated consciousness. And then he says, when it's not working, when you're working with it in a grasping, attaching, craving, anxious way, then the eyes see forms, but they're influenced by, and here they use the translation, is one of the translations for klesha, sometimes defilements, or it can be used as dust, or it can be used as outflows, or it can be used as fetters. But in any case, when the eyes are influenced in this way, this consciousness, and so forth, and goes through the 6 in this way. So in a sense, what it's describing is, the Chan expression is, we turn our backs on this awakened, pure, unattached state and unite with the dust or the defilement. Sometimes it's also called dust fatigue, which I really like, because there's corresponding physical effect of just being, like 2 days ago when these winds came, and it was just blowing all this dust in my eyes and my nose, and everything was just swarming with fatigue from the wind and the dust. So this is a poetic term that's used to describe dust fatigue is one expression that's used. Weariness, weary outflows is another one that's used. It's both of them describing a depletion, a weakening. And then it says, when the mind is conditioned by dharmas of the mind, it's influenced by these defilements of these mental constructs. All of these corresponding organs have their corresponding consciousness. So this is how the theory presents itself. And the practical side of this is the consciousness, these afflicted, defiled consciousnesses, this consciousness that's grasping and attaching, when it is free from that, it actually turns back into what's called perfect wisdom. And when wisdom is turned and it goes out and attaches, it becomes ordinary consciousness again. So sometimes they use this movement to describe how quick this can happen. The wisdom is actually metaphorically compared to a mirror. So as a mirror, that which appears in front of it manifests very clearly, but the mirror doesn't hold on to it. The mirror doesn't call it forth. The mirror simply reflects it as it is, and when the object passes, the mirror is sunyata, empty again, just in that state. Now, there is no opposite, but I created an opposite, so you forgive me for adding a knowledge. I got the sponge. So they have the sponge in the mirror. So the mirror reflects and doesn't attach. Things bounce off it, but the sponge, on the other hand, absorbs it. And when the sponge encounters eyes, sense, sight, sound, smells, it sucks them up. It says, oh, these are true. These I want to linger on. I want to dwell. I want to identify with. This is me and mine. And then the result is we waste away and kind of fall into a scatterblitz when this happens. Now, the scatterblitz is one expression that's used, but I like sponge because with sponge, the result is we think we're getting something. We think we're acquiring something in this mad process of gathering in. And what we're doing actually is weighing ourselves down, and you start to feel heavy after a while. You feel the weight of these attachments and these. And of course, there isn't any real attachments. It's got to be, it's a mental, physical state of feeling weighted down and heavy and oppressed because you kind of absorbed all these things, and yet there's an underlying dissatisfaction. You really can't have them and keep them. You know that. So there's this psychic tension of always wanting but never able to get and hold on to what is wanted. Anyhow, that's why I like the idea of the sponge. So the corresponding feeling when you don't let consciousness cling to and stick on or absorb this is the opposite. It's a very light feeling, and this is what's called zidzai, a very buoyant, light ease in mind and body and emotions. So let me read you then this passage of, well, the Chan expression is really wonderful. Again, the translation, without a single thought attaching, not a cloud in the sky for 1,000 miles. As soon as the mind is moved, you're covered in fog. And there's a beautiful sort of short, pithy expression of this. And to me, this poetry also describes a feeling, not just a kind of an idea, but a feeling. I remember our first time when I arrived at California, I was blown away by the blue sky. I mean, it was like, I'd been in the Midwest and everything, and the summers are usually hazy, but when I got out here, there was this like blue cobalt sky, just wow. And to me, that image of the unattached, unbound, liberated state of mind corresponds to that. And then, of course, if you want to think of in the mornings here when I was in San Francisco for all the boo, boo, which are the foghorns. And then you go out and it's all gone. Everything is gray and wet and damp and you can't see anything. So this describes when the mind is moved by sight, sounds, and smells and thinks these are real and attaches to them. It says you're covered in clouds. And covered in clouds, you misstep because you can't see clearly where you're going. So I want to share this section from the Platform Sutra where he describes how this happens. It gives sort of the psychodynamic dimension of this. And this, I can read it to you. It's basically going through, there's the wisdoms. So there's 5 wisdoms associated with eyes, ears, nose, tongue. There's a 6th consciousness, sorry. And then there's a sixth consciousness associated with mind dharmas or objects of mind, however you want to translate that. Then there's a seventh and eighth consciousness. Now, these are not separate consciousnesses. These are just functions or dimensions of a single consciousness, but it can move and manifest and shift and exercise its functioning in this way. So here's the verse. The wisdom of the great perfect mirror is your own nature pure and clear. The wisdom that sees the identical nature of all things is your mind without defect. Subtle, wondrous, observing wisdom sees all effortlessly. And the wisdom of doing everything successfully is like a spotless mirror. So this goes through all the consciousnesses and then compares them to mind without defect, a spotless mirror, perfect mirror, and so forth. Then the verse goes, the 5 and the 8 together, 6 and 7th too, change and turn through cause and effect, or cause and result. So they change and turn depending on what we intentionally do with our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, our words. And so there's you get this very dynamic thing between consciousness and wisdom, constantly transmuting, almost thought to thought, moment to moment, so fast sometimes it's just like a blur. And this is where it's often driven by habituation. It's not driven, this makes it sound like, okay, I think I'll choose this and that. But what's really happening most of the time is that our emotions, our feelings, our habituations just run roughshod, and we're just almost on automatic pilot. So to be able to stop and pause and to see this is really, really difficult. Then he says, they change and turn through cause and effect. And then the last two lines, they're merely useful names. They have no real nature of their own. And then the final line, which is the how to work with it. If in the place of change and turning, you don't attach and linger on feelings, you flourish and forever abide in the samadhi of the dragon. This is called the Naga Samadhi, the great equanimity and unmoving steadiness. But the key thing here is the place of change and turning. When they turn, and they're turning with everything that we encounter. That's why my teacher had a verse, he said, everything's a test to see what you will do. If you mistake what's before your eyes, wisdom turns into consciousness. If you don't mistake what's before your eyes, you see it as it really is, consciousness reverts back into wisdom. So it's not something that's attained or lost per se, but it's something that's dynamically changing all the time. It's more like a balancing rather than attainment or loss. And so it's a kind of dynamic equilibrium. And this is really at the heart of what cultivation is. It's not esoteric and far out. It's just in the daily things of sight, sound, smells, taste. Do you recognize them? Do you observe them without clinging to them? Or do you try to suck them in and say, me and mine, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, it just turns so quickly. But this verse is powerful in the sense that it tells you can actually get a handle on it, even though the habituation is strong. And partly what you're doing with precepts is you're giving yourself just a little space not to completely be sucked in, a little breathing space, and then with meditation, maybe a little more space to catch it as it's arising in a quiet moment. And if you can catch it in that quiet moment when nothing else is going on, I mean, sight, sound, smells, taste, they're all gone. All you got is dharmas of mind when you're sitting, so to speak. You're calling up the sights and sounds, but they're memories. And if you can get into that gymnasium of exercising and watching the mind as it moves, you get a little space where you can see between impulse or stimulus and reaction. There's another possibility of quiet observation. And when that quiet observation, you all of a sudden realize, I don't have to. I don't need to always follow these impulses and whatnot. That expands, hopefully, out of the meditation hall into walking, standing, sitting, even in your sleep. So that it's a progression, but the cultivation begins in the smallest of places. So I go on with the intent of trying to finish up. Right, Ken? We're going to finish up this. I want to quote you another passage, a text that I'm not greatly familiar with, but I keep being drawn back to, and this is called the Visuddhimagga. And in the Visuddhimagga, there's a wonderful description. It goes like this. everywhere, in all forms of existence. Such a one is beholding, such a one meaning the ordinary person, is beholding merely mental and physical phenomena kept going by their being bound up through causes and effects. It almost mirrors the verse we had previously. No doer he sees behind the deeds, no recipient apart from the karmic fruit. And with full insight, he clearly understands that the wise ones are using merely conventional terms when, with regard to the taking place of any action, they speak of a doer, or when they speak of a receiver, of the karmic result that they're arising. Therefore, the ancient masters have said, no doer of the deeds is found, no one who ever reaps their fruits. Empty phenomena roll on. This view alone is right and true. And while the deeds and their results roll on based on conditions all, there's no beginning that can be seen, just as it is with seed and tree. So it's a beautiful poetic passage describing the same thing. Time for a sip. It's funny, over the years I read these things. I mean, I kind of started sticking my nose into these matters and books and issues back in the 70s, 1970s, okay. And just over time, some of them come back, and they come back with a fresh light that I hadn't seen before. Some that I've memorized, I forgot. Some that I thought I forgot, I memorized, and they'll come back in moments of meditation. But over time, it's just this wonderful, it's sort of like I got in the Midwest, we have what are called cedar chest. And then they have a thing called a hope chest. Anybody know what a hope chest is? What's a hope chest?
I have one. It's like a giant wooden chest that you can put things in so moths don't get them, or you might keep them for a long time.
Right. It's precious things you kind of keep in there and then sometimes you go in there and say, oh my God, that's where that is, I forgot it. But also in the Midwest, back when we didn't have liberation and women were betrothed to get married, they'd have a hope chest. And they put all these things in there that they would hope would come to use once they were married. So it could be precious china or silverware from somebody, precious jewelry. Maybe nowadays it'd be what I'd call a prenup. Anyhow, sorry. Any event, I had this sort of, in the cedar chest is where you put all your woolens, because because in the summer the moths would have a woolen picnic, and they would come in, and then in the spring, in the fall, when you take your clothes off, all your sweaters were perforated, and because the moths had eaten through them. But, you know, as I wasn't a Buddhist then, I thought, what a great thing about impermanence, right? Just like, my beautiful sweater is now moth-eaten. Constant change. Anyhow, I have put these into this kind of chest of mine, and time and again they come out. Anyhow, number 9. Thus, in accord with principle, observe that absolutely everything is without a nature. The Dharma eye is inconceivable. It's seen. It's without distortion. It's seen without distortion. Means it is seen without distortion as the Dharma eye. So instead of thinking the Dharma eye is some magical thing here, okay, you've opened your Dharma eye, right? And you rub it and rub it, hope it opens. You go, oh, my Dharma eye is closed. Well, but it's actually seen without distortion. So Dharma eye is a term for seeing things as they really are, undistorted. It doesn't mean some magical faculty in the middle of your forehead, even though it might be represented that way. Okay. And then finally, whether we name it real or unreal, false, not false, mundane or world transcending, these are merely false words. I'm not happy with this translation. If we go down, and I'll tell you why. One, actually these are different characters that are used. And when you read that last verse, Ru shi, Ro bu shi, Ro wang, Ro fei wang, Shi jian, Chu shi jian, Dan you, Jia yan shuo. So you see the wang, Ro wang, that's false. Wang is false. right? And you see Fei Wang, also false. But when you go to the last line, when they use false, it's actually jia. That's the character used. And I think that's for a reason. It wasn't that they went to the Chinese thesaurus and said, let's find a different way of saying the same thing like you do when you write your papers. I think what they're indicating here is a little different sense. Jia can be translated as false, but what it really means is sort of abstractions or provisional, a borrowed sense. And that, I think, is much better for this than saying it's false. It means like artificial or borrowed or supposed. Supposed. And I like this because it is not saying that words are false, but words are temporary provisional devices we use to indicate something that might be true. So this kind of what I call dichotomized thinking, Buddhist texts in general don't favor this. I think there's a lot of other traditions that don't favor it either. I talked to some of my colleagues. One insists that the Confucian tradition doesn't favor this. The Taoist tradition doesn't favor these rigid dichotomies. For example, in the Avatamsaka Sutra, the distinction between worldly and sacred, between living beings and Buddha, are considered to be false dichotomies. They're not real. They exist along a continuum. So it's a continuum of potential and manifestation rather than distinct separate things. Even the secular and the sacred exist along a continuum. And I think the transformative range is lost when we use these strict dichotomies and freezes the potential, I think, to reach a kind of non-dual wholeness. If you say all living beings have the Buddha nature, all can become Buddhas, then you're not saying there's a distinct separate living beings and Buddhas, but there's some continuum here between them. And if you go back to what we were doing with consciousness here, you can see consciousness used well is Buddha. Consciousness misused is ordinary living being. But it's not a fixed dead category. In thought after thought, it says in the Platform Sutra, if in one thought you're unconfused, one thought you're Buddha. Thought after thought unconfused, thought after thought Buddha. Conversely, one thought confused, ordinary living being. Thought after thought confused, thought after thought, ordinary living being. So you see there's a fluidity, a plasticity to this that the either or words don't really get. And you see this also, when the Avatamsaka has a wonderful passage, I couldn't find it tonight. It'll be coming if I live long enough to go through the whole text. But if I don't, somebody's got to do it here, who's here tonight. You guys just have to come forth and keep this fire going. But there's one passage where I think it's Manjushri is saying, yes, it's true, the verse goes, that words and language and words are false, but it's jia. But then he says, we use the false to find the true. So it's actually doing something you also see in the Lankavatara Sutra. The Lankavatara Sutra has a passage that says, when you see an object afar like the moon, you point to the moon to point it out. You use your finger to point to the moon. But he says, a foolish, unaware person thinks you're pointing to, they look at the finger rather than what it's pointing to. And they literally, this is where you get the Chan expression, mistaking the finger for the moon. Because the moon is what's being pointed to. So words and language, Lankavatara says, is not the truth. But you use words and language to point to the truth, which has to be directly realized and embodied and can't be just simply memorized or grasped into words. So I will pause there and then I'll go to something else. This happened to me many times in my teaching with Master Hua. When I would try to intellectually say, okay, so it's like this. And he would say, well, you seem to have got the words, but you still don't have the meaning. Why is the meaning different than the words? Because it doesn't mean anything to you yet. What? They're just, he says, like the pretty parrot. Quack, quack, quack. All you do is parrot the words. So, this is very frustrating for someone who's coming through an academic background because, on your exams, if you get the words, you get the grade. You don't get the words, you don't get the grade. Meaning, maybe, maybe not. So, I was thinking back to, you remember maybe a couple lectures ago, I was talking about that Buddhist philosophy is really concerned with extinguishing the background buzz of dukkha. It's actually addressing the problem of human dissatisfaction, anxiety, stress, basically on the really one great matter that we're born only to die and there's this brief interval in between and we don't really know what to make of it. I mean, we think we know what to make of it, but we really don't. Anyhow, I have a friend who is now dying literally as I talk, and he's going through this realization that much of what he did, what he thought was really solid and blah, 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 is actually just evaporating before his eyes. Any event, this can happen early, it can happen later. So if Buddhist philosophy is really concerned, that Buddha said, I'm concerned with this one great matter of suffering, dukkha, dissatisfaction, stress, and I'm also concerned with what causes it. And my other concern is the possibility, which I believe he says, and I have actually realized it can be ended, and how to do that. These are sometimes called Four Noble Truths, but I think they're more like truths that noble ones understand, something like that, rather than they're noble because of, anyhow. So I talked about Malunkyaputta. Putta. Anybody know about Malunkyaputta? Putta? Ever hear his name before? Yeah, he's a possible vice presidential candidate. No. Malunkyaputta Putta was a disciple of the Buddha. And you remember I told you the story. He comes to the Buddha with a host of questions. Really, and the Buddha either ignored his questions or said to him, he scolded him in this case because he wanted to know, is the cosmos infinite or finite? What happens after death? What happens before birth? Is the mind the same stuff as the body, or is the body different than the mind? He was going on and on with these very metaphysical questions. And this is where we get the famous poison arrow analogy. And the Buddha Malunkyaputta Putta demands answers to these questions and threatens to quit the Sangha if he doesn't get answers. So this is like the first chance you have of, what do we call it, consumer rights or whatever I know in higher education now, if you're disgruntled, you go to HR and said, I didn't get what I was promised. What is it called? I'm sorry.
Making sure the quality is good from teaching, otherwise you won't return it.
Something like that, right. When we do our accreditation, we have this thing too that you have to have very stipulating what you're offering and what you're giving, and if you don't give it. So when we had originally, we say all people who come to the university will be taken on Uterism Yaksam Bodhi, we had to take that out. Because we couldn't really measure that, and because we couldn't guarantee that everybody would get it. Anyhow.
It's called manage expectations.
What is it called?
Manage expectations.
Manage expectations, right. Well, this is what the Buddha is doing with Malunkyaputta Putta. So he says, Malunkyaputta Putta, first of all, in interest of consumer sovereignty and whatnot, I did never promise that. Okay, I never promised you answers to these questions. If you think I did, you just didn't hear right. And Ananda said, thus I have heard, it's right. He didn't say that. So he says, the Buddha says, suppose, I'm just paraphrasing, Malunkyaputta Putta, a person were wounded by an arrow thickly smeared with poison, and his friends and family brought a surgeon to treat him. The man would say, I will not let the surgeon pull out this arrow that wounded me until I know if the man who wounded me was tall or short, middle height, dark, brown, golden skin, and whether the man lived in a village, a town, or a city, whether he was a wanderer, and until I know whether the bow that wounded me was a longbow or a crossbow, and whether the bowstring was made of fiber, reed, sinew, hemp, or bark, and until I know with what kind of feathers the shaft of that wounded me was fitted, and whether those of a vulture, a heron, a stork, a hawk, or a peacock. And the Buddha goes on in this manner about the guy who's right there at the ER, but saying, don't treat me until I really know all these. And the Buddha says, so the wounded man in the parable would die of poisoning long before he received any answers to these questions. And so Malunkyaputta says, yeah, that's right. And the Buddha then says, if anyone comes to the Buddha and says he will not follow the Buddha until these questions are answered, he too will die. So this is a famous poison arrow analogy, basically saying focus on what's real and important and don't waste your time. So anyhow, I had this in my, and I've always used this analogy. And this last week at the city, we had a really cool presentation. Three faculty members, myself, Iwan, and Sean, did a thing on the 16 arhats. So there's these beautiful, incredible scrolls of the 16 arhats that Snesh and I brought back from China. And that's a whole other story how we got them. Anyhow, we got them in China, brought them back. But I never really knew the details of them very well. So Iwan did this wonderful presentation on their origins back in dynasties in connection with Japan and Korea and so forth, and the art involved. And because they had a really focus at that time in Japan, she wore a kimono for a presentation. Yeah, I tried, but it didn't fit, so. And then Sean and I gave a background how we got them, and then some meetings with arhats through Master Hua when we were cultivating and traveling. And then Sean just gave a presentation where he read Therigatha verses, which are the verses of the various monks, and Therigatha of the nuns, who upon their awakening described their awakening. And so he read this one. And I'm listening to this, and at the end of it I go, oh no, really? I wonder. And then I asked him afterwards, and I said, is this? He said, oh gosh, you're right, it is. I missed it too. So here's how it goes. So this is the Therigatha birth of Malunkyaputta. So what I was wondering is, okay, so the Buddha said you're going to die before you enter. Did he just leave? Did he said, I want my tuition and fees back and room and board, I'm out of here? Well, what happened to him? See, that same thing happens in the Lotus Sutra when 5,000 of the disciples walk out. I was thinking about that, and the Heng Sure said, where did they go? Sounds like a really simple question, but where do you go? You're there with the Buddha, the great teacher, and he says, I'm not going to answer those questions because they're foolish and you're going to die before you answer them. Did he leave? But apparently he didn't. So here's his verse. This is his Malunkyapputta's verse. For a person living heedlessly, craving grows like a maluva vine. It's a parasite creeper that destroys everything it's growing on, like poison oak here. He leaps from existence to existence like a monkey in a forest craving fruit. That image of the monkey going through the forest, for someone who lives heedlessly, for whom this horrible craving overtakes, the source in people of the world and their entrapment, his sorrow grows like ginger stalks in freshly fallen rain. Continues. Whereas he who overtakes this brutal craving, so hard in the people of the world to get beyond his sorrows skid away from him like dewdrops of water from a lotus pad. Did you ever see a lotus pad in water? When I go to Maine, I go to a place called the Cranberry Bog, and there's not lotuses, but they're water lilies. And the water lilies have this pad, and it's kind of waxy. And so when the water gets on the pad, it just turns into a little globlet and just falls off. And this image is obviously like drops of water from a lotus pad, describing, again, what I would say is equivalent to the mirror. Remember I used the mirror analogy? Now you have this. It doesn't absorb. It's not a sponge. So who overtakes this craving, for him drops of water like a lotus pad fall off. And this describes this wondrous existence. Next line. Therefore I tell you, be it to the highest good of all of you who have come together here, dig up the root of craving, like one in need of ginger digs up a ginger stalk. And may Mara, who represents here sort of craving and death, may Mara not destroy you time and time again like a river does the reed upon its shore. And then his last two lines, very powerful, he says, put the teaching of the Buddha into practice. Don't let the precious moment pass you by. For those who let the precious moment pass, lament thereafter when consigned to states of hell. And now the last line. And when Sean read this last line, I go, what? Really? It's heedlessness, the constant source of dust. It's heedlessness, the constant source of dust. This is ashrava, outflows, and klesha. From heedlessness has ever fallen dust. With heedlessness, with wisdom, one should pull out the arrow one out that's lodged in one's own heart. The last line. One should pull out the arrow that's lodged in one's own heart. And it's like this, such a beautiful rounding. The Buddha gives him this arrow analogy. He doesn't leave, he stays, and then at the end he says, I pulled out the arrow. So he's actually done what he needed to be done. But that last line, when Sean read it, I thought, oh my gosh, it connects the two completely. And many times in the lively encounters sections between the student and teacher, you'll see the first encounter, the teacher points to some metaphor analogy for something that's their source of affliction. And often their verse or statement of awakening has to do with actually turning that very same idea or affliction into its opposite. And so the affliction becomes bodhi, just like the ice becomes water. But the skillful teaching that's involved in this is just beautiful. Anyhow, that's my aha story for tonight. Jin Chuan or Jin Wei? Jin Wei, are you back from COVID? Ah. How many times have you had it?
Actually, the first one was unclear if you had it or not.
Uh-huh.
I assume it was my first one. I was the first time fully experienced the joy
The joy.
of retreat, COVID retreat. Yes. As you know, we travel quite a while here and there, and we spent the last few weeks at the city of 10,000 Buddhas when we had a bowing session, talking about the purifying the Dharma eye, see clearly what's going on in our hearts. And it's a real gymnasium, you can see. It's a lot of movements, you know, and so forth. And everything is a test, so I was tested positive. You know, it was like, what? I didn't expect that. I was I think, second man who was positive, COVID positive. They have like a very good quarantine area. One was in retreat, retreated in retreat, what is kind of ironic. And we have like 20, maybe 4 women are positive tested as well. It was beautiful to see. We helped to set it up, the space for them. So TOB is Tower of Blessings, is the place when the elderly nuns are taken care of and the women also stay there. They have a separated room with the screen and fully participates in the session, even being, you know, affected by virus, COVID. And so they are so like to be involved in this practice. They didn't want to get out from the quarantine in the end, the women. And also take me a while to get out from 2 weeks. But what I want to share a bit is quite a scene when you join the 10,000 Buddhas repentance session. It's you coming to this Buddha hall and it's like a few hundred people and you see in their faces they're sincere, you know, clear, single-minded commitment. Is like in the air, you feel the faith, devotion, and for most Westerners, it's not that easy to enter this path, you know. And what they do, they bow, right? We bow for 4 hours a day, and actually today is the last day of the session. They bow for 1 month, every day. So it's a real gymnasium. After 3 days, many people feel all the pains, all the muscles aching, and take a while to get in shape. But after a few days, people actually quite well fit and do quite well. I would reflecting on this kind of difficulty to approach this devotional aspect of practice, right? Like, why we have to bow to all these Buddhas, all these statues? Let's do real thing, right? Meditation or something, you know. It's like, it's tough, you know. And sometimes it's helpful to look at on the epidemiology of the words, origin of the words, I notice. And I look at devotion. It came from the old French word, devotion, if I will say. It means a reference or all what came from the Latin word. Devotionem, what is defer, there's a lot of chains to back to the origin. For the word divovere, and di is down or away. Vevere means vow, to vow. It's like, this is very interesting way to seeing the process of bowing. And Marty talked about mechanism of cultivation, to purifying our heart and mind, see clearly and transform ourselves. To see this first, like putting down, we literally down our head, with kind of melting the ego, this kind of importance of ourselves, that I am the center of the universe and everything. So we're putting down and seeing clearly all our habits, whatever trouble us and trouble people around us, and we kind of renew ourselves. We stand up and we vow, right? We renew. We kind of committed ourselves that I want to cultivate the wholesome qualities in our heart. And what really was highlight for the bowing session, and I'm very grateful to be, in fact, in the very diverse community, what we have a lot of also Asian disciples. Many of them actually flew from Malaysia, like 70 of them. And you see they're very committed. As they vacation, instead of go to Las Vegas, they go to city of 10,000 Buddhas, wake up 3:30 a.m., you know, go for all the practices, services. So it's quite a commitment, you know, from 3:30 to 9:30 p.m. And especially what I was very inspired by, to seeing one family who came. It was 12 of them, from 5 years old to I think 8 years old or something. The senior of this family and the young ones, and see how they interacting among each other with this kind of joy. Really, they put down a lot of things, you know, to come to the monastery, stay engaged with these different practices. And I see this kind of, this other aspect, something renew in them, you know, something comes out very wholesome. And in the end, we have a small circle with one of these boys, the 5 years old, and ask him, what is your highlight of being here? You know, I very like because people don't fight that much here, you know, and because, it's pretty good recognition for the young man that, you know, lack of violence brings you peace and kind of renewing your heart, you know. So it was very nice to seeing that. So anytime you have a chance, once a year it's happened, but definitely encourage you to have a taste of it, how to put in devotion, so kind of putting down whatever is unwholesome, and renew ourselves, kind of vow to have a better life, free from afflictions, is very a real gift for ourselves and others. So saying that, we have more gymnasium activities in the spiritual gymnasium. We have a lot of retreats happening here. We have Jinchuanshi, when there is the Sudana Center, I think from June 1st to 8th, is the retreat when Marty actually will teach, and Professor Doug Powers as well, their Master Sure, in person, in fact. So don't miss that. It's a very interesting topic about healing and renewing our hearts and minds using the Yogacara that Marty talked about. We can learn more about how this 8 consciousness works together, and psychodynamic method of Melanie Klein. So you can imagine discourse of Vasubandhu and some post-Freudian therapists. Will be very interesting to check this out. We have Buddhahood Farm. It's June 22nd to 29 in Oregon. We have another opportunity to practice together in the camp, and Guanin session is from July 22nd to 29. So you can find all information on our Berkeley Buddhist Monastery website. And hope you can join us. We have meditation every day as well here, and hope you can meet you again in the next semester, right? In summer in September.
We'll gather when again, Ken?
Buddha's birthday. So we'll be May 19th on Sunday, 9 a.m. We'll have a... Yes.
And
Here you can find... And we have lunch and, some sharings and chanting and whole package.
and then this class on the Avatamsaka. Late August, maybe early September. Yeah. Well, usually what I do is I at least take about 4 or 5 weeks to disappear into the main wilderness. So coming out of the wilderness back to the world, okay, they're non-dual. I shouldn't create the dichotomy. But it takes me a while to get my voice back. But probably, yeah, late August, early September. So be well during the summer. Don't waste your time. And don't freak out either. Okay.
Okay, we have...
Marty, so this is your last class of the semester. On behalf of Yvonne, who has to do this, I'm doing this, and on behalf of everyone in here and also online, people who are thriving because you're teaching.
Okay. Thank you. It's funny, I'm not particularly fond of lotuses, but I love peonies. And there's something about a peony, when it opens, it's just so relaxed. It's just, everything just relaxes and falls, and it makes me feel relaxed watching this. I promise not to eat them. I will just watch them relax. Do the transference in English.
May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see, our hands and hearts can find in giving unity. May our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of painters into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. 3 bows. Bowing respect to the triple jewels.